Dear Chair of the Trustees, dear Trustees, dear David, dear Dee, are you here? Good. Dear friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I feel truly honored to be here today. And I have really been moved by your decision to invite me to hold the Beshara lecture. So I was eager to come and to make that possible, and it's a very nice feeling to be able to do this here. And I'm also happy to be in London again, which is always energizing me. Although you could say it might be also the paradigm of what I'm about to criticize. But so is the paradox of life. And yes, so I start and I will show some illustrations. So it will be not a slide talk, but a classic talk with some pictures trying to pull you deeper into what I have to say. The grass on the side of the path was all yellow. The small creek that used to run by its side had gone dry. Before the drought, shallow water had been dripping over fragments of slate, gurgling along under the herbs. Even in high summer, the flow had been enough to quench the dog's thirst. But now it was gone, leaving only a line of dust meandering along the trail. The Mediterranean sky blazed overhead, pale blue now at noon, almost white. There was a smell of dried herbs, of faded grass evaporating into the heat of thyme and sage. It had not rained for a long while, which was unusual in the mountains inland from the Riviera coast. My friend Giovanni, who tends a little farm down by the Vara River, was pretty composed about the drought. Every day for hours he pumped water from the stream and sprayed it over his beans, tomatoes and courgettes. It was strange to walk that track with all water gone. It was like setting foot on a different planet, exploring a barren celestial body which had once harbored life, but now had fallen silent. Setting one foot in front of the other, I felt like an intruder into nothingness. I was not personally afraid of the drought, though. I knew I could go and drink clear water from the tap. If I had wanted to, I could have pretended to detach myself from the dusty body I was walking on. But that would have meant to say goodbye to that body. It would have meant to sever the physical contact between my soles and the dusty ground, and to lose an intimate love. I wanted love, so I chose suffering. Staying here and following the trail meant to suffer the thirst of the mountain's big and silent body. I had to go with what was there, find my way of bearing with it, and understand how to give back. I followed the slope uphill. I passed along some hazelnut bushes and touched the leaves in passing. Many of them had started to grow yellow. I could sense the fine fur on their surfaces pressing against my skin, telling me of their presence, articulating themselves in the medium of my own body, calling me, gripping me, but in that very slight and well-behaved way we humans have nearly lost. The bushes gave some shadow, and I followed the rivulet beneath them. The stems grew from among sand and pebbles. The taste of the air had changed. It smelled of shadow, of rest, and of water. And there it was, a tiny pool between a couple of bigger boulders. It was hidden in the shadow of the hazelnut trees. Stillness emanated from the surface, sheltered by the leaves. There was silence, apart from the tiny whisper of some drops falling from the stones. I sat down on one of the boulders, grateful that the little pond had survived the drought. The leaves overhead let past spots of light. They illuminated the sandy ground of the still water and then radiated back. The specks of brightness seemed like tiny suns shining from below the surface. Now and then a leaf detached from a twig, touched the water with a slight rustle and drifted slowly across the pond. When I had watched for a while, I realized that not only the leaves moved. There were sources of light underwater dashing back and forth. I understood that they were caused by water skeeters. These insects did not sink in, but were held by the tension of the water. There were half a dozen bugs sliding along the surface, and where they sat, they bent the elastic skin of the water so that it concentrated the sunlight as though it was shining through a lens around their feet. The animals caused the water to shiver and sparkle. They set the liquid alight with sun. I tried to touch the bugs. They escaped quick as light. I did not even see them flee. They just reappeared somewhere else. I sunk my fingers into the liquid, and where my fingertips made contact with the water, they set it in flames. They sparked sunlight. I felt the embrace of the pool, cool in the midst of the heat. I touched the water and received the touch, and this touch became a source of light. I drew circles in the pond and with my fingers recreated the sun. The life in which I found myself in the Apennine Mountains disclosed itself to me as profound mutuality. It occurred as a sensual encounter between bodies, mine and that of the earth. It was togetherness, touching one another, breathing together, suffering the drought together. Where our surfaces met, where our flesh touched, there was light. I was comforted and at the same time shaken. I wanted that still pool not to dry out. I wanted its life-giving power to carry on. And my wish became part of the universal desire for life that had started with the first spark. Looking back on my experience of that day, I cannot help but call it an intense experience of being in love. I was welcomed by the land through gentle touch and gracious recognition of my vulnerable flesh. And I was welcoming its otherness, its surfaces, its bodily textures and shapes, their gentleness, their stillness, their silence, their unspeakable presence. I was suffering the drought, thirsty and sweaty, and I was silently pledging to do everything I could to help making it stop. I yearned for it to stop, so that which was there and touched me and made my fingers set the water ablaze with sunlight could be there and stay there and go on forever. How do you call it when you wish another being life, wish her or him to live forever? How do you call it when you feel welcomed by this other, deeply and meaningfully welcomed in the way that you are seen in your deepest substance? I assume you'd call it love. At least I call it love. Let us, for a moment, take this insight as an ecological lesson. It is a lesson in the living presence of other beings, water beings and bug beings, hazel beings and stone beings, and the air and the sun teaches us about how they get along with one another. Let us take it as an insight into the deep character of what our scientific age uses to call an ecosystem. If I, entering that ecosystem, taking part of it, immersing myself in it with flesh and bones, sense the mutuality of being in love, then maybe that's just what we need to understand. Ecosystems are love processes. Aldo Leopold, the US forester and nature writer and eco-philosopher, understood the attitude that is required from us by the landscape. He called it thinking like a mountain. But a mountain does not think, you will reply. At least we should all have learned that in school. School, that's, by the way, where we are taught that only humans think and that nerve cells with which we are doing our thinking are electrical cables, or that a cell is a factory. Just enjoy that for a second. I found it, I looked for it because a friend of my daughter who is 1 year from graduating high school had that, the German version of that, and so they still teach it in school. Look at the fuel they use in this cell. Looks pretty ancient. Aldo Leopold knew that the mountain did not think in the way humans think they do think, and that he, the mountain, thinks nonetheless. He thinks through wolves, for example. Yes, there are wolves in the Apennines, just recently seen by the guy who runs the hardware store in the little village in the area I'm talking about. The mountain thinks through wolves and through yellow leaves and through dry sand and through foggy linings around the crests. He thinks through being and through touching me with this being. He thinks through claiming reciprocity and being answered in the flesh. A mountain thinks in terms of involving me into his project of producing a soft and fertile skin of living bodies, recreating the sunlight that has brought them into being. A mountain thinks because he is a multitude yearning for presence and contact. A mountain thinks because he is a transaction of light. He thinks in terms of realizing a love process. His thought is generous because he desires aliveness to happen. Older peoples paid tribute to the thought of the mountains. They prohibited talking badly or even too loudly in their presence. And they knew that allowing yourself to think like a mountain means to be engaged in giving something back. Aldo Leopold calls this attitude, the ability and the desire to think like a mountain, a prehistoric patent on the nobility of being. He knows that humans are trying their best to revoke that patent everywhere they can. In the case of wild animals, quite often, as Leopold observes, by shotgun. And our shotguns have many faces. They are bulldozers and growth hormones and stock market funds and carbon emissions that create drought, and which was once the most humid mountain region in Europe. Yes, it's in Italy. It was in Italy. We are revoking the mountain's ancient patent on nobility because we have stopped believing in it a long while ago. Nobility is now a term which is to do with celebrities. It's a subclass of what we think to be the universe's secret pivot, wealth. We are not concerned with thinking like a mountain anymore. We are trying to sell it. We can't hear his voice. We can't feel his touch. We don't feel loved anymore. And we have stopped giving love. All which remains is a faint pull in our hearts, a trace of bitterness. If we carefully taste this bitterness, we understand that it is shame. You don't behave this way if you are loved and taken care of. Only very childish people do. But in our times, it is called childish if we fall in love with a mountain, if we take serious that caressing the water's skin creates light, if we take serious our need to give something back. If ecosystems are love processes, and the way mountains think is a realization of love, which manifests in a myriad ways of yearning for touch, then our age has a wrong idea about what life is actually about. If you have a wrong idea of what life is about, take that seat. If you have a wrong idea of what life is about, and you let yourself be guided by that wrong idea, the probable outcome is that you'll die. The situation of the living world, as you all know well, is that it is overrun by death. The biosphere, as it is dying. You can call it the sixth extinction event, or, if you wish, the retreat of the beings into the spirit world, because they are resigned of what their youngest sibling, the child in the control tower, man, is doing to how fertility wishes to think itself. But the situation remains basically uncontested. We are living in an age of death. How did we get there? Why is our mainstream view looking at life from the perspective of death? Why are we waging a war on life? In order to understand this, we need to see to what degree our view of life has been dominated by economical thinking. To make it short, biology became economy when it became modern. It became economy when Charles Darwin read Thomas Malthus. Darwin had struggled to find a mechanism explaining gradual change in evolution, and then he discovered Malthus' ideas. The theories of a national economist thus found their way into the core of biological thinking. How, by this, could evolutionary biology and thus biology in general not become a biological variant of economy? Malthus' thoughts were inspired by the bleakest Victorian reality in the working class neighborhoods of London and Manchester. This was a time of unmitigated child work, of poor houses, of people starving in the streets. Deadly competition was the social reality, and Malthus was talking about this and not about a natural given. But Darwin used these ideas as the pivot in his grand narrative of how the biosphere evolves. Darwin was able to fuse the science of life with the science of trading, because both already were based on the image of war. All nature is at war, Darwin had written in the first draft of his Origin of Species, read to the Linnaean Society in London, 2 miles from here to the south, 161 years, if I calculate well ago. Read to the Linnaean Society in London, quoting the Swiss botanist Augustin de Candolle, "The rationale was, the natural state is violent strife." It is fascinating to see that these thinkers did not realize that the war they were talking about was not a natural fact, but something human societies bring forward. What Malthus took as a social principle was the decision of a small, wealthy class to wage war on the poorer people. To this day, we are not really aware of this projection. Often, though, when someone experiences herself in a love relationship with the living world, she is taunted as projecting her ideas. Instead, the root metaphor of modernity, reality as a war of all against all, is itself a projection. The foundational idea of mainstream biology, therefore, is not different from the core principle of neoliberalism. Currently, we could say there is only one combined science about life and about social exchange, about any kind of relationship in the world and with the world, and this is bioeconomy, or you could call it bioeconomy or bioliberalism. Maybe we should not even call it science, we should call it an ideology, a worldview, a decision. And this worldview stems from inequalities, from the absolute powers of some, and the hope of all to detach from this belligerent mess. But you will only be saved from it if you win. The game is about getting out of here, and getting out requires subduing others. Does this ring somehow familiar? The rationale of war is save yourself at the cost of others. The ethos of love is give yourself. But to give is absurd in a world in which you are compelled to keep as much for yourself as possible in order to survive. If you are at war, the other becomes a target. How do we dare to think that a war on climate change stemming from this ideology will save us? Any war starts with the act of separation. If we begin to separate ourselves from the remainder of the world, all things become means, and we become means too. If we sort the world in two boxes, inside and outside, the damage is already done. To posit a subject here and objects there inevitably leads to the destruction of both. Subject and resource, agents and goods, that is the working formula of capitalism. Things here, things there, humans here, this is also the ideology of war. Ecology, and I mean mainstream biological ecology, disapproves of this worldview on every level. When all beings are mutually connected, as lovers are in a love relationship, nobody can be a means for the other. Everybody is each other's purpose. If we start from an ecology of love, we get to a very different picture of what our reality is about and how we should bring it forth. The good thing about this is that it is easy to corroborate. We only need to go outside and ask, and if we are invited, get in touch. If you follow the Vara River downstream, it will lead you to places where creation still seems at its very beginning. It leads you into the childhood of the world. The Vara is the stream that irrigates the little pond, the little plot of my friend Giovanni, as you remember. When he was a kid, after his parents had died, Giovanni lived with his uncle. His uncle was a subsistence farmer like many in those mountains were well into the 1970s. His uncle taught Giovanni, there he is, how to be satisfied with few and how to act in a way that this few never ceases to flow. He taught him what they here call intelligenza, meaning more than smartness, more than intelligence. It means an attitude to keep life flowing, to not take more than you give, to allow yourself to live and to allow others too. Intelligenza is a value deeply entrenched in the Apennines, and I mean physically entrenched in the Apennines as a living landscape. Also, the mountains act with intelligenza. Also, the mountain acts with intelligenza. He strives for being and organizes himself in a way that being springs forth from him as spring forth the little rivulets and tiny brooks in the higher ranges that feed the Vara River. My friend Giovanni has become a farmer because his uncle has taught him how to receive the gift of the earth, how to make it bigger, and how to give it away. He puts much dedication and seriousness in this work. He does it in his spare time, early before and late after his daily chores as a worker for the municipality. Giovanni grows hundreds of pounds of produce. He gives most of it away. It is dangerous, actually, to come close to his plot in harvest time when he is around. You will inevitably receive a basket full of courgettes, a box of potatoes. Last time he gave me so many I couldn't even carry. When I tried to refuse, he told me, "Keep your mouth shut, you're German, so you're supposed to eat potatoes." That was his way of showing intelligenza, of compelling me to accept the gift. What the Vara River shows equally is nothing else than intelligenza. He, the river, knows how to find his way and how to keep it open for hard times when space is needed, for times when the rains have washed down the valleys and pushed away the boulders, digging new riverbeds with the eager hands of swirling eddies and rushing waves, ripping off the slender willows that have settled on the sand, pushing into the land in order to let it imagine new forms of itself, shape-shifting, transforming earth into curved ripples, making stone liquid and water crash on water hard as stone. If you follow the Vara down to the sea, you have to walk over pebbles, climb over boulders, and swim through narrow stretches, making yourself carried away by the water's force. For long, winding miles, the river is inaccessible, tucked into deep and silent valleys. If you want to keep close to him, you need to walk the water. The Vara remains young all his way down to the coast. He is concerned with his own desire to flow and to keep the flow going. He has not, as so many streams, become an aquatic slave. He has conserved his prehistoric patent on nobility. He is an end to himself. That summer, we walked down to the pebble bed of the Vara more than once. At a bend of a little road only few people know, there is a path leading down to the water. It traverses a plot of private land and then sinks steeply down, crossing an orchard with withered apple trees. This summer, the trees had already lost many leaves. Some stems stood barren from last year's drought. The soil was cracked hard, the grass discolored. Grey locusts unfolded their orange wings when they suddenly glided away from our steps. Beneath the trees, hundreds of wild carrots lifted the umbrellas of their blossoms into the air. Each was as large as a saucer, composed of many tiny efflorescences, the color a timid white and a shy pink on the pale green backdrop of the supporting shafts. The perfume filled the air. If you looked from afar, you could see that the blossoms formed a layer above the meadow, a shining stratum, a band of crystallized light. Behind the orchard, we walked through a line of willows and stepped onto a steep sandbank. And there it was, the silent water, forming a small lake in the shadow of a cliff, lined by bright pebbles. It was a pool like the one I had found uphill of my dried-out creek, only much bigger. It was as silent and as alive. There were no water bugs on the surface, but schools of young trout hovering in the current. The stream circumscribed a long curve, coming swiftly down from the right, running between boulders and pebbles, then slowing down into the pool and gushing away again to the left. The rock wall at the other side of the pond showed a bright line indicating the average level of the stream, which was about 1/2 meter higher. Huge stretches of the river lay exposed. A desert of light gray and creamy violet pebbles flickered in the sun, interspersed by boulders and broken trunks. The splintered wood withered to a nearly white color. Heat oscillated over the stones. The curved stretch of the riverbed was made of minerals, but the stone was also water. The dry surface formed the water's mirror image, reflecting the shapes of its fluid body, its softness, its gentleness, its fleeting touch. The stones had become water by being kissed by it, by being rearranged by it, by following its pull. Walking awkwardly over pebbles and boulders, I felt that I was witnessing an erotic encounter. In his love affair with the stones, the river inspired the mineral to soften, to answer back in softness, to reply the gentle embrace of the traveling waves, the tickle of the eddies and swirls. I understood that all this was a love process all over again. We spent many hours here during the summer. We comfortably rested beneath the stretched out branches of an old oak, tucked into a thicket of hazel, sheltered by the flickering fingers of the willow leaves. It is a place where you need to strip off your clothing and give yourself to the water. It is a place made for making love, for being in contact, for losing your shape. It is a place of birth and a place where things are taken away. The silence waited for us and greeted us and commanded respect. I had the feeling of stepping directly into the source, where the force of bringing things into beings stems from. It was reality as an end in itself, the yearning realized. We have access to this reality because our bodies are always part of it. We know because in every moment we are participating in the living exchange the Vara River is part of. We are material parts of a reality which is interchange and flow. We are not separate, but coupled into an ongoing reciprocity, which we must not stop in order to stay alive. We breathe in the oxygen breathed out by the trees, which, with their roots, grip the hard crest of the rock. These trees dissolve the stone and incorporate it, building calcium, potash, sulfur, and phosphorus into their bodies, sending oxygen into the air. We breathe out and nourish the plants. We breathe in and are nourished by them. We breathe out, make our body available as air, which is then consumed again, deposited, creating rocky sediments. Part of the prehistoric bliss of the Vara River is that this experience is so graspable and sensual here. It is easy to step out of human skepticism and just accept this, accept the feeling of being whole through being apart. To my eyes, we have to reckon with this experience. We have to take it serious as an invocation of reality. I call this, the perspective of this experience, poetic objectivity. Poetic objectivity. We can speak about the living whole because we are precisely not separated from it. We are, on a profound level, the love process which makes ecosystems recreate themselves. We have objective knowledge because we are part of what we know. It is the same way in which we have knowledge of our body because we are our body. This knowledge, however, can only be poetic because it is shared. It is about meanings and needs. It is not about data and facts. We know because we all have a standpoint. We humans, like all beings, are not mere spirits nor mere objects, but crossroads of meaning. We experience reality as meaningful because we have goals, because our flesh has goals, because there is a desire to create sparks from touch. I call this perspective, our perspective, empirical subjectivity. We are feeling subjects. Our empirical subjectivity enables us to experience reality in an objective way. So that's the flip side of the poetic objectivity we can see the world in. It comes through our empirical, embodied subjectivity, through active participation, through embrace, and through meaning. We should not underestimate the power of this perspective. Each individual belongs to the world and is at the same time owner of this world, owner of the stone flecked by sunlight coming through the hazel trees, licked by the stream's eddies, caressed by the willow leaves falling slowly under the weight of time. Perception is a dance of interdependency with the world. The world belongs to us entirely, and at the same time, we are fully entrusted to it. It is only through this give and take that we become conscious of it and ourselves. It is only through honoring this give and take in a manner that provides life that we can build our place in the world and the world in us. I can hear the skeptics say, but these are just romantic projections. But I insist that what I describe here is the normal way, the normal human way of connecting to reality. We connect to the whole through feeling a part of it, through being held by reality, and through wanting to give back. Desiring a love relationship in shared aliveness is our default mode of being. This explains, for example, why so many humans yearn to be in the presence of other beings. The presence of the living web of which we are a part is the experience of being in a love relationship. That's what we crave for. Nothing more, nothing less. This relationship comprises our whole existence far beyond the level of conscious thought. It is part of our breath and part of the shared breath of the atmosphere. It is part of the world's love for itself. It is the world's love for itself as my own experience and my own ability, as the desire within my own vulnerable flesh. This desire to love expresses the yearning of the one whole world. This one longs to caress us through the swelling textures of soft water, through the creamy light of autumn leaves, through the perfume of thousand blossoms flowering. In all this unfolds the desire to be. When we step into its radiance and give it space, its desire becomes a caress. It reveals what has been the purpose from the beginning, giving away caresses and feeling how they are received in the same move in a union which can only come about through the distinctness of individual flesh. If we understand our individual endeavors as being in service of this desire, in service of this reality's dream to create fertility and to spread connections and self-expression, then the border between my life and your life starts to dissolve. This is what happens when we are in service of life. Being in service of life eliminates the dualistic boundary between me and you, between me and the so-called objects. It means taking the position of the one through my own actions. What we are experiencing when we immerse ourselves into ecological connections, when we are in company with other beings, is the fact that we are a part and a parcel of a vast labor to give life. We feel that we are given life and that we are giving it, and that it is right to do so. We feel that our individual survival is not more important than to keep this life-giving process going. Because in the end, profoundly, we ourselves are this life-giving process. And we feel that to accept this requirement means to be showered with light, reflected by a hidden pond, means to be caressed by leaves which carry soft fur on their underside, to be filled with sweet air, impatient to become part of us. It means to tingle with desire in our own flesh, to join this sweet air by breathing out our bodies, to join the silent water by letting ourselves sink into it, by reuniting with the whole in every breath, which is a little death, and receiving something of the whole within myself. With every breath, we are giving a part of ourselves away and receive something else. Every breath makes us shift our shapes. Every breath is a give and take. Every breath is part of a love process. We are already inside the whole, already dissolved, already given away. What we call our personal experience, in truth, is this: being the whole of the ecosystem from one standpoint inside of it. We are the dusty surface of the pebbles. We are the liquid water, finding our way into every crack, caressing the solid from inside with flowing tenderness. We are the whole process concentrated into one focus, but still the whole process. Going with the flow means to die all the time and once and for all. But at the same time, it means that we cannot die. Nothing can happen to us. Nothing apart from our wrong choices disturbing the desire to be fertile, the aliveness that stems from yearning to love. So what can we do? I suggest go out and let ourselves caress by the breeze. Let ourselves be seen by the sun reflected in the last creamy leaves of autumn. Address the water that touches our skin with her own. Express gratitude and pledge to give life. If you do, then this one world will carry on being fertile forever. Thank you very much.